Some of the biggest records of the 1970s were never supposed to reach your radio at all. Station managers pulled them, governments blacklisted them, and a few of the people who made them paid a very real price for it. So today, we're revisiting 15 banned songs from the 70s you must hear for the first time in 50-plus years. Number 15. Lola by the Kinks.
She said, Lola, hello, hello.
Released on June 12, 1970, Lola arrived with a story that most listeners assumed would be the problem. Ray Davies had written a song about a young man's encounter with someone who walked like a woman and talked like a man. And in 1970, that alone was enough to make programmers nervous. Australian stations refused it outright on those grounds, and several American stations faded the record early so the ending never arrived. The BBC, though, objected to something else entirely. Corporation rules forbade anything resembling advertising, and Davies had name-checked Coca-Cola in the second verse. That single brand name was enough to keep the record off British airwaves, and in 1970, the BBC held such a grip on the charts that no airplay meant no hit. So Davies left the Kinks' American tour and flew to London to fix 2 words. He recorded the change on May 23rd, wasn't happy with it, flew back to rejoin the band, then made the trip a second time on June 3rd. On that attempt, he got the take he wanted, and a generic cherry cola replaced the brand name for British ears. The ban lifted. Lola climbed to number 2 in the UK and number 9 in America. And it pulled the album it came from, Lola vs. Powerman and the Money-Go-Round, along behind it. Half a century later, it remains the song most people name first when they think of the Kinks, Cherry Cola, and all. Number 14. Ohio by Crosby, Stills, Nash, and Young. On May 4th, 1970, Ohio National Guardsmen opened fire on students at Kent State University during a protest against the widening of the war into Cambodia. 4 young people were killed. David Crosby handed Neil Young a copy of Life magazine carrying the photographs, and Young had a finished song within the hour. The group booked a Los Angeles studio and cut it on May 21st in 2 takes with no overdubs. Young later wrote that Crosby cried when they finished. Atlantic rushed it into stores even though Teach Your Children was still climbing the charts and would now be competing with it. On the fade, you can hear Crosby's voice breaking through, asking why and how many more. The B-side was Stephen Stills' Find the Cost of Freedom, so both sides of the record carried the same message. The trouble was the opening line, which named President Nixon directly. Crosby later called keeping that name in the lyric the bravest thing he had ever heard, and he was right about the consequences. AM stations across the country refused to touch it, including stations inside Ohio itself. What saved it was the newer, looser world of FM underground stations. In the big cities and college towns played it constantly, and word traveled from campus to campus. Ohio reached number 14 on the Billboard Hot 100 without the support of mainstream radio, and in 2009, it was inducted into the Grammy Hall of Fame. Number 13. Give Ireland Back to the Irish by Wings. On January 30th, 1972, British soldiers opened fire on a civil rights march in Derry, Northern Ireland. 13 people died that day. Paul McCartney, whose mother's family was Irish, sat down and wrote a song about it almost immediately, and Wings recorded it at EMI's Abbey Road studios within days. It became the debut single of his new band, and it featured a Northern Irish guitarist, Henry McCullough, playing on a Wings track for the first time. The reaction was immediate. Days earlier, a BBC spokesman had told the press that the corporation had banned only 7 records since 1964 and had no intention of adding this one. On February 10th, before the single had even reached shops, they changed their minds and announced it would not be broadcast. Radio Luxembourg followed. Independent broadcasters fell into line, and American programmers largely left it alone as well. What happened next has become one of the strangest footnotes in British chart history. The single sold well enough to sit high on the national chart, which meant the BBC had to acknowledge a record it refused to name. DJ Alan Freeman handled it by reading out the position and describing it only as a song by a group called Wings. That March, Melody Maker devoted a 2-page spread to broadcast censorship, and the McCartney single took up most of it. The record reached number 16 in Britain and number 21 in America. In Ireland, it went straight to number 1. Number 12, My Ding-a-Ling by Chuck Berry.
Catch me playing with my ding-a-ling-a-ling.
Chuck Berry wrote Maybelline, Johnny B. Good, Roll Over Beethoven, and Sweet Little 16. None of them gave him a number 1 record. The song that finally did was a novelty tune he didn't even write, recorded almost by accident. On February 3, 1972, Berry played the Lanchester Arts Festival in Coventry, England, with a young British backing band whose members would later form the Average White Band. Late in the set, he pulled out a piece written years earlier by Dave Bartholomew, split the audience into 2 halves, and had them sing the chorus back and forth. He apparently had no idea the show was being taped. The single went out that July.
I sit there and play with my ding-a-ling-a-ling.
The double meaning wasn't subtle, and a number of American programmers simply refused to add it. In Britain, morality campaigner Mary Whitehouse wrote to the BBC's Director General demanding it be pulled, describing schoolboys who had learned exactly what the song was really about. The corporation wrote back and declined, deciding the record could stay on the air. Top of the Pops went so far as to have Tony Blackburn hold up a string of silver bells to explain what the title supposedly meant. My Ding-a-Ling hit number 1 in both the United States and the United Kingdom. The single ran about 4 minutes. The version on the album The London Chuck Berry Sessions runs closer to 11, audience and all. Critics at the time were merciless, and Berry didn't care in the slightest. It remains the only chart-topping single of his career.
Catch me playing with my ding-a-ling-a-ling.
Number 11, Rocky Mountain High by John Denver.
Colorado, Rocky Mountain High.
In March 1971, the Federal Communications Commission issued a notice reminding American broadcasters that they were responsible for knowing what was in the records they played, particularly anything that might be read as glorifying drug use. Stations across the country got nervous, and some began pulling anything with an ambiguous word in it. John Denver's Rocky Mountain High walked straight into that. The album arrived in September 1972, and the single followed at the end of the year. The song came out of a camping trip up at Williams Lake, near Aspen, where Denver and friends had watched the Perseid meteor shower from 11,000 feet. One line described the group gathered around a campfire, and the word high turned up in it.
Rocky Mountain High.
That was enough. Programmers who had never seen the Rockies decided the song was about something else, and it was dropped from playlists all over the country. It still climbed to number 9 on the Hot 100 in 1973, and it became one of the most beloved records Denver ever made. He never quite let it go. In 1985, testifying before a Senate committee during the hearings on record labeling, Denver told the room his song had been banned as a drug record by people who had no idea what he was describing, and used it as his argument against rating systems. Colorado eventually adopted the song as one of its 2 official state anthems.
Colorado, Rocky Mountain High.
Number 10, Big Six by Judge Dredd.
A little fire blue can blow up your horn. The sheep's in the middle and the cow's in the car.
Alex Hughes was a big man from Kent who had worked as a nightclub bouncer in Brixton and a debt collector for Trojan Records. He took his stage name from a Prince Buster song, and when Buster's Big Five became a hit, Hughes went into Trojan's studio to cut a follow-up of his own. What he recorded was a string of nursery rhymes rewritten with seaside postcard filth, delivered over a reggae rhythm. The label head happened to walk past during the session, liked what he heard, and signed him on the spot. Big Six came out in 1972 on Trojan's Big Shot imprint, and the BBC banned it before most people had heard it. Several distributors refused to carry the record at all.
Little Miss Muffet sat on a tuffet, her knickers all tattered and torn.
None of it worked. Big Six sold over 300,000 copies, reached number 11, and sat on the British chart for roughly 6 months without a single spin on national radio. Judge Dredd went on to place 11 singles on the UK chart across the decade, more than any other reggae artist, including Bob Marley. The BBC banned every one of them. When he tried releasing cleaner material under the name Jason Sinclair, they banned that too. He also became the first white artist to score a reggae hit in Jamaica. And when he traveled there to perform, a good part of the audience was astonished to discover what he looked like. Guinness eventually credited him with the highest number of banned songs of any recording artist, and he had predicted it himself in a 1975 newspaper interview.
A little boy blue come blow up your horn, the sheep's in the middle and the cows in the corner.
Number 9. Kodachrome by Paul Simon. Paul Simon had been working on a song called Coming Home when the word Kodachrome drifted into his head. He liked the sound of it, built the lyric around it, and cut the track at Muscle Shoals in Alabama with the studio's house band. Released on May 19, 1973, it became one of the defining singles of his solo career. It also became a legal and broadcasting headache. Kodachrome was a registered trademark of Eastman Kodak, the color film the company had been selling since 1935. Kodak insisted that pressings of the single carry a sticker acknowledging the trademark. There is also a camera brand named in the second verse, which didn't help matters. The BBC applied the same rule that had caught the Kinks 3 years earlier. Songs that appeared to advertise a product were not broadcast, and a song titled After a Film Stock was about as clear a case as the corporation was ever going to see. Columbia didn't even try. In Britain, Take Me to the Mardi Gras was issued as the A-side, and Kodachrome was tucked away on the flip. Australian broadcasters kept it off their airwaves too. In America, where none of those rules applied, the record went to number 2 on the Hot 100, held off the top only by George Harrison. British listeners largely had to discover it on album, or catch it on a friend's imported copy. The corporation has long since relaxed the rule, and these days you can hear Kodachrome on BBC Radio without anyone blinking, which is more than can be said for the film itself. Kodak stopped making it in 2009. Number 8. Star Star by the Rolling Stones. The Rolling Stones recorded most of Goat's Head Soup at Dynamic Sounds in Kingston, Jamaica, working through the nights of late 1972. The album closed with a fast Chuck Berry-style rocker about a woman collecting famous men, and Mick Jagger had given it a one-word title that no record company in 1973 was going to print on a sleeve. Atlantic Records handled American distribution, and label chief Ahmet Ertegun insisted the title be changed before he would put the record in shops. The band gave him Star Star. The chorus, however, was left exactly as it was, which meant the original word was still sung a dozen times over. The final verse also named Steve McQueen and John Wayne, which caused a separate round of nervous meetings. Goat's Head Soup was released on August 31, 1973, and went to number 1 in Britain and America. 10 days later, on September 10th, the BBC announced that Star Star would not be broadcast on grounds of obscenity. That decision effectively ended the song's life on radio, and it never became a greatest hits staple. It stayed in the live set instead, where Jagger leaned into the provocation harder with every tour. For a band that had spent a decade being called dangerous, it was the first time a British broadcaster had drawn a hard line against them. Number 7. The Pill by Loretta Lynn. Loretta Lynn recorded The Pill in December 1972, and her label sat on it for more than 2 years. MCA knew exactly what they had. When it finally appeared in early 1975 on the album Back to the Country, It became the most talked-about record of her career. The song is a conversation between a wife and a husband. She has spent years pregnant while he ran around, and now, thanks to contraception, things are going to be different. Lynn had married young and had 4 children before she was 20, and she never pretended the song was about anyone else. She told Time magazine that had the pill existed when she was having babies, she'd have taken them like popcorn.
Since I've got the pill.
Roughly 60 American stations refused to play it. A preacher in West Liberty, Kentucky, devoted a Sunday sermon to condemning it, and much of his congregation went out and bought the record. The Grand Ole Opry reportedly held a 3-hour meeting about whether she could perform it. She said she'd have walked out of the Opry rather than drop it. Without airplay, it was selling 15,000 copies a week. It stalled at number 5 on the country chart, low for an artist who was used to number 1s, but crossed to number 70 on the Hot 100, the best pop showing of her entire career. Rural doctors thanked her. Number 6. Love to Love You Baby by Donna Summer. Donna Summer was living in Munich, singing sessions and stage roles, and was almost unknown in her own country. She handed producer Giorgio Moroder a title she'd been turning over, Love to Love You Baby. He built a song around it, and she agreed to record it only as a demo for somebody else to sing. She approached it as an actress rather than as herself, imagining a character in the Marilyn Monroe mold, and asked for the studio lights to be turned down while she worked. What came back was breathy enough that Moroder refused to give it to anyone else. When Casablanca's Neil Bogart heard it, he asked for a version long enough to fill a whole side of a record, and the album take ran nearly 17 minutes. American radio didn't know what to do with it. Time magazine listened closely and published a count of the moans, and once that number was in print, organized opposition followed. The BBC banned the record outright. Italy's state broadcaster did the same the following year, and a number of American stations quietly dropped it. The clubs made it a hit anyway. Love to Love You Baby reached number 2 in the United States and number 4 in Britain, launched one of the defining careers of the decade, and helped establish the extended dance single as a format. Summer herself later said she'd have chosen a different song to open her career with. Number 5. Legalize It by Peter Tosh.
Legalize it, yeah.
Peter Tosh had co-founded the Wailers alongside Bob Marley and Bunny Wailer, and by the mid-70s he had gone solo and grown openly hostile toward the Jamaican authorities. He had been detained and badly beaten by police, and he responded the way he always did, by making records about it. Legalize It was his argument for the decriminalization of ganja, made at a moment when the Jamaican government was cracking down hard. The single appeared ahead of the album and was pulled from Jamaican radio almost at once. Tosh's answer was to buy advertising space in a Jamaican newspaper and print the words of the song in full, so people could read what they weren't allowed to hear.
I will advertise it.
The album followed in June 1976, with a sleeve photograph of Tosh sitting calmly in the middle of a ganja field. In Britain, the Independent Broadcasting Authority sent a notice to commercial stations warning them to think carefully before playing it. The suppression achieved nothing. The record traveled internationally, made Tosh a figurehead for drug law reform well beyond the Caribbean, and eventually sold over 1 million copies in the United States alone. Decades later, with attitudes reversed across much of the world, the song is treated in Jamaica as a piece of national heritage rather than a threat to it.
Legalize it, yeah.
Number 4. Zombie by Fela Kuti.
Zombie, oh zombie. Zombie, oh zombie.
Nigeria in 1976 had been under military rule for a decade. Fela Kuti, the bandleader who had built Afrobeat out of highlife, jazz, and funk, had already been harassed and arrested repeatedly. That year, he released Zombie, a long, driving track in which he barked parade ground commands, and his singers answered each one by calling the soldiers mindless. Ordinary Nigerians recognized it instantly. Crowds chanted the song at soldiers in the street. School children sang it at the troops who had been posted to enforce discipline in their classrooms. The government banned it from the airwaves, and there were reports of people being arrested for playing it in public, at parties, or through a speaker. On February 18, 1977, the Army answered properly. Around 1,000 soldiers surrounded Fela's compound in Lagos, the commune he had declared independent from the Nigerian state. They broke in, beat everyone they could catch, and burned the place to the ground. Fela was badly injured. His 77-year-old mother, Funmilayo Ransom Kuti, a famous activist in her own right, was thrown from an upper window and died of her injuries the following year. Fela's response was to carry her coffin to the main army barracks in Lagos and write a song about it. Zombie itself never stopped circulating. It played from homes and shanties all over Lagos throughout the ban. And it caused enough trouble abroad too. Riots broke out while he performed it in Accra, and Ghana barred him from entering the country afterwards. 50 years on, it is still the record his name is attached to first. Number 3. Short People by Randy Newman. Randy Newman had spent years writing songs from the point of view of characters he wanted his listeners to find ridiculous. In 1977, on the album Little Criminals, he did it again with a piano tune sung by a narrator, with an irrational hatred of anyone under a certain height. Glenn Frey of the Eagles sang the bridge, which states plainly that short people are the same as everybody else. A great many listeners heard the verses and missed the joke. Complaints started at one station, and once the record became a hit, it reached an audience that wasn't listening for irony at all. Stations in Boston, New York, and Philadelphia dropped it. Newman began receiving threats against his life. Then it reached the State House. In Maryland, a legislator introduced a bill that would have made playing the song on the radio illegal. Contrary to a rumor that has followed the record ever since, the bill never passed, but the fact that it was filed at all says a good deal about the temperature of early 1978. The controversy did what controversy usually does. Short People climbed to number 2 on the Billboard Hot 100 and became the biggest-selling single Randy Newman ever released, along with his biggest American album. He has said since that he doesn't regret writing it, though he understood why a shorter man being ribbed at the office wouldn't have found it funny. Number 2. God Save the Queen by the Sex Pistols. The Sex Pistols released their second single on May 27, 1977, in the middle of Queen Elizabeth II's Silver Jubilee. Drummer Paul Cook always insisted the timing wasn't planned and the song hadn't been written for the occasion, but nobody in Britain was inclined to believe it. 4 days later, on May 31st, the BBC imposed a total ban on airplay, with a senior Radio 2 executive dismissing the record as an exercise in bad taste. The Independent Broadcasting Authority told commercial stations to leave it alone. Woolworths, W.H. Smith, and Boots all refused to stock it. One shop simply left a blank space where the title should have been on its chart display. Then came the boat. Virgin's Richard Branson chartered a vessel and sent the band down the Thames past the Houses of Parliament, playing at full volume. Police forced them to dock, and manager Malcolm McLaren was arrested. Things turned uglier afterwards. Cook was attacked outside a tube station, and singer John Lydon was set upon near a pub in Highbury. With no radio play and half the high street refusing to sell it, the single reached number 2, kept off the top by Rod Stewart during Jubilee Week. McLaren always claimed it had actually outsold the official number 1, and 49 years later, people are still arguing about it. Number 1. Another Brick in the Wall, Part 2, by Pink Floyd. Pink Floyd released The Wall in November 1979, and its single became the biggest hit the band ever had. Roger Waters had written a song about rigid schooling and the teachers who ground children down, and engineer Nick Griffiths brought in more than 20 pupils from Islington Green School, just around the corner from the studio, to sing the chorus. Their voices are what everyone remembers. It reached #1 in 14 countries and topped the American chart on March 22, 1980, holding there for 4 weeks. But the place it landed hardest was somewhere Pink Floyd had never played. In February 1980, schoolchildren in Hanover Park, Cape Town, began boycotting classes in protest at the deliberately inferior education handed to black and mixed-race pupils under apartheid. The Pink Floyd single had just entered the South African chart. Within weeks, students across the country were singing it at demonstrations, aiming a British rock song about English boarding schools squarely at their own government. By March, it was the #1 record in South Africa. On May 2, 1980, the Directorate of Publications banned the song and the album outright. Police shootings during the boycotts killed dozens. The ban held for the rest of the decade and was only lifted as apartheid itself began to unwind. Waters has said since that a government blacklisted his song because children were using it to demand an equal education, which is about as much power as a pop record has ever had. If any of these brought a memory back or introduced you to something you'd never been allowed to hear, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. We dig up the stories behind the music you grew up with every week, and we'd love to have you along. And if there's a band record we missed, tell us in the comments below. Thanks for watching.